I know I'm not the first to point this out, but with what we see in chapters 3 and 4, this connection seems even more relevant. Darkners become grayed out versions of themselves when they are in the wrong world, and that is way too similar to the concept of goners to simply be a coincidence. The goners are characters who have been erased from their realities. They take on this contorted form, devoid of the color they should have had. We don't completely know what constitutes a character becoming a goner yet, though we do have some live examples of characters becoming them. Clamgirl in Undertale becomes a goner right in front of us, and then disappears altogether. It's also widely theorized that Jockington, as well as this one Rudin guy in Castletown, might be becoming goners as well. The case of a character like Jockington is also pretty interesting, because he's considered to be very popular and well known throughout Hometown. We don't know much about the goners, but I don't think it's an accident that someone who's supposed to be integral to Hometown might be goned. There's a constant theme of being forgotten or erased with goners. If Jockington is indeed becoming one, then it's most likely to show a high-profile character being erased without a trace. Even with these examples, there isn't a clear through line or commonality, at least not one that's really unique to these characters that can truly define goners. All of these characters do seem to know more than they should. Clamgirl foreshadows Deltarune and directly mentions Susie. Jockington potentially foreshadows how to beat the Titan, and that one Rudin guy knows the name we entered for the vessel. More on that later. But man, if it were just knowing too much, wouldn't the same fate await all of the secret bosses and a good deal of the other characters as well? I mean, seriously, if I had a dime for every single character that knew more than they should, well, I wouldn't have too much, but you get the point that I'm making. There's not much known about the goners, but we do know a good deal about how darkners work. We know that darkners will turn gray when they are brought to a world that they don't belong in. As long as they have purpose in whatever world they're in, they will be fine, but the second they are without a use, they turn to stone. Obviously, the two ideas are quite similar. Goners are grayed out beings that have been removed from their world, and darkners that are removed from the world they belong to turn to grayed out stone. The one place that no characters seem to risk turning to stone in is Castletown. I'm not sure that a proper explanation has been given as to why this is the case, but I do think there is a thematic reason for this. A Darkner can only come to Castletown if they are spared and or recruited by the player. So the reason they belong is simply because they have been granted importance by the player. Their existence has been given new meaning and purpose, allowing them to continue to exist separate from the world they originated from. I think this idea can potentially explain why characters like Lancer and Rules can turn to stone and then be brought back. It's not like they've been completely forgotten after all. On the other hand, we see how Ram ends up at the end of Chapter 3. He is doomed to be forgotten as his use is long gone, and as such there is no saving him when he turns to stone. The interesting thing about Ram is that he had every trait we associated with secret bosses, other than a way to persist. The secret bosses all live on in some way or another through the Fun Gang. All of them impart something that continues their existence in some way. I mean, I guess we don't completely know Gerson's fate at the end of Chapter 4, but his impact is crucial to the Fun Gang, especially Susie. Hell, I wouldn't even be completely surprised if his presence did persist in the Justice Acts, kind of like Jebel and Spamton existing in their equipable items. These characters don't necessarily need to return, at least not as their character selves, but they still have presence in the story, and as such none of them turn to stone. But a character like Ram, who is so stuck in the past, so stuck in a world that no longer exists, inevitably ceases to exist himself. Another character of note is the weird bird NPC in the library. No, not Birdly. The one who appeared as a goner and one of the Gaster followers in Undertale. This character also seems to be in the process of being goned. In fact, it's the speech deterioration of this bird fella that adds credibility to the idea that Jockington is transforming, as his speech is also deteriorating. Bird Guy is also the only example of a goner in Undertale that didn't have a normal variation. The normal version isn't in Undertale, but it is in Deltarune. The implication here is that the normal version of this bird guy becomes the goner version of itself that we see in Undertale. We know that Deltarune initially was being made side by side with Undertale. Perhaps then goners are characters who have been placed in the wrong game, erased from the original they were intended to appear in. It's very likely that there were characters that appeared in Undertale that Toby intended to save for Deltarune. Since Deltarune is such a massive project, I'm sure Toby had to grapple with the possibility of not getting to bring all of his ideas to light, and as such repurposed some of those ideas into Undertale. This idea doesn't even have to be exclusive to the goners. The fact that the Undertale cast exists in Deltarune in the first place shows that these characters are shared between these two projects. This fact alone doesn't mean that all of those characters were always intended for Deltarune specifically, but that Toby doesn't shy away from repurposing his characters. From a meta perspective, the goners may simply be the means of showing that some of these characters may have been intended for a different project. If that is the case, then our bird friend being a character intended for Deltarune would of course appear as a goner in Undertale. And this connection is further backed by a song by the title of The Place Where It Rained. This soundtrack is of course calling back to the Undertale soundtrack, It's Raining Somewhere Else, the song that plays when Sans first implies he's from somewhere else and that he can't go back. It's in this scene that Sans tells us that sometimes it's better to accept what's given to us, and that going back isn't necessarily worth it. And of course in his fight, Sans mentions that he stopped trying to go back to where he came from a long time ago. The place where it rained pretty blatantly implies that the place Sans was referring to is hometown in the Deltarune world. To add to this, it has also been implied that monsters in Deltarune bleed, and Sans is the only monster to bleed in Undertale. It really looks like the Sans in Deltarune goes on to become the Sans in Undertale. But how would that happen? Why are these characters in Deltarune being erased and appearing in the Undertale world? And how does this tie back to the Darkners turning to stone? To explain this, let's look at another detail shared by Darkners and goners: the Contortion. Goners at first glance appear to just be grayed out versions of their respective characters, but on closer inspection, their features are also warped. Clamgirl's head becomes an eyeball, Monster Kid's eyes lose their pupils, and this orange guy becomes more skeletal looking. The bird guy's whole silhouette seems to turn into a mouth. This contortion is very similar to Ralsei's explanation of dark worlds where inanimate objects contort into whatever your mind makes of them. In the darkness, a mundane object might appear to be something entirely different, and I think that logic can be applied to the goners as well. But why would goners be affected this way? Well, to wrap it back around, this concept of turning gray in the wrong world originates in the dark worlds in regards to only the Darkners. But as the bridge between the dark world and light world becomes thinner and thinner, and more characters are enveloped in a world they don't belong to, this concept starts to affect Lightners as well. The Roaring, at least according to Ralsei, will turn all Darkners into gray statues, and the Lightners will have to fend for themselves in eternal darkness. After long periods in the dark, it's not uncommon to start seeing things, or for your worldview to contort. The ability to see color is meaningless in the pitch black. Eventually, any semblance of the characters these Lightners once were would be lost in the dark, their old selves gone forever. Perhaps then their fate would not be dissimilar to the Darkners. I suppose that's a fine explanation, but it's kind of baseless and doesn't really factor in the connection to Undertale. It also doesn't account for Lightners already turning into goners. Or hell, a Rudin in our castle town, the safest place for Darkners, where they almost certainly belong, also turning into a goner. And most importantly, it doesn't feel tied to the themes of being forgotten and erased. So then what might a more thematic eternal darkness look like? Now, it is very likely that this next section is pure brain rot, but fuck it, we ball. When we are repeatedly told the ending will be the same no matter what, isn't there a constant to endings in games? From a meta perspective, when we finish a story, all of the characters have fulfilled their purposes. They have been used up. In other words, no matter how a story ends, the characters end with it. Maybe Eternal Darkness, then, is simply us finishing the game, leaving these characters forever. If that is the case, then there's only one choice for the characters to avoid being completely forgotten, and that is to be repurposed, to find a new meaning in a different world. And those that could never let go were erased, just like the world they originated in. Maybe that's why Sans gave up trying to go back. There was nothing left to return to. The only way to exist was to do so in this new world. This also serves to explain why we don't see Togor, the middle child to Asgore and Tutorial Dreamer, and brother to Yeah, obviously I can't definitively say how Deltarune will end, but I can say that this concept of darkness turning to stone is tangentially related to the concept of goners. Darkness turn to stone when they've lost meaning or use in the world they are in, but as long as they can find new meaning in their existence, they'll be able to turn back just fine. And darkness are objects contorted into new shapes in the dark worlds. I think these themes apply to goners as well, and serve to explain how these characters work. Characters that don't belong to the light world or dark world, but rather a world that is gone. And I think it is this fate of losing purpose or meaning that haunts the characters of this game. We've already seen such fears in characters like Spamton, Tenna, and Jevil, and the results of actually losing purpose in poor old Ram. Even the nihilistic outlook that nothing matters in the end is reflective of this theme. If neither the heroes nor villains can change the outcome, then what purpose will they have after all their efforts fail? Perhaps the only way then is to find new meaning in the story, to reinterpret the characters, and to reinterpret their roles. Keep the characters alive by keeping their story alive. There is one elephant in the room. The vessel we create in the beginning of the game. It's the vessel's name that we input that shows up as the name in Castletown. No matter what options we pick, the vessel is completely gray. And in the game files, its assets have the goner label. And it's no surprise that the vessel is a goner. It's immediately discarded from us. The meaning it should have had as the player character of this game is completely removed. Instead, Chris becomes our vessel, or at least their soul does. People have mentioned that the second hero in the prophecy isn't meant to be Susie, but it's also possible to read the first hero, the cage, to be the vessel instead of Chris. I mean, we literally choose their human parts, and had they become the player character, then they would certainly be a cage with a human soul as well. I wonder what happens to a main character if they are completely removed from their role in the story. What exactly becomes of them? Where do they go?